Observe a moment of silence to remember and honor those who lost their lives on October 25th, those who were injured on October 25th, and the families and friends of those killed or injured individuals, as well as all those who witnessed the horrific events of that evening. Thank you. On November 9th, 2023, Governor Mills issued an executive order creating the Independent Commission to investigate the facts of the tragedy in Lewiston and appointed my colleagues and me to serve on the commission, to be chaired by former Chief Justice Daniel Wathen, who will be joining us this afternoon. As has been our habit, I will ask the members of the commission to introduce themselves. I'll start. My name is Ellen Gorman. I live in Falmouth, and I served on the Maine Supreme Judicial Court from 2007 until 2022, when I retired. To my left.
I'm Deborah Bader. I'm a retired forensic psychologist.
Good morning. I'm Jeffrey Rushlow. I'm a former district attorney and a retired district court judge.
And to my right.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Anthony Ng. I'm a psychiatrist in Bangor, Maine.
Good morning. I'm Toby Dilworth, and I'm a lawyer in Portland.
As stated in the executive, I'll ask the people who do all of the heavy lifting to also introduce themselves. Thank you. As stated in the executive order creating the commission, our task is to determine the facts surrounding the tragedy in Lewiston on October 25th, including the relevant facts and circumstances leading up to the tragedy and the police response to the tragedy. As the executive order directs, the commission, quote, should determine the full scope of its work and should ask any question necessary of any person that is relevant to the charge of gathering the facts regarding Robert Card's mental health history, contact with state, federal, or military authorities, access to firearms, the initial law enforcement response to the Lewiston shootings, and the manhunt that ensued, and any other matters the Independent Commission determines are relevant to its purpose. We have followed our charge by holding both public hearings and private meetings, and with gratitude for all those who have appeared and provided us with information, we will continue in this fashion until we have completed our questions. Today, we will be hearing from Cara Cookson, Director of the Victim Services Maine Office of the Attorney General, and from 3 members of the Army Reserve who served with Robert Card, Daryl Reed, Edward Yurek, and Sean Hodgson. With regard to the Army Reserve members, I note that all are appearing pursuant to subpoenas issued after a unanimous vote of the commission. In addition, I note that, as with all of our public hearings, we have the tremendous assistance of a number of ASL interpreters, and those interpreters will be visible throughout the live streaming of today's events. We will start with Cara Cookson. Would you simply start by stating your name and your position, please?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. My name is Cara Cookson, and I am the Director of Victim Services for the Maine Office of the Attorney General. I'm trained as an attorney, and I have worked in the victim services field since 2015. I also serve on the adjunct faculty of Vermont Law School, where I teach courses on trauma, victim services, and victim rights law. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before the commission today. I am honored to be here representing the Maine victim service professionals who were responsible for carrying out the victim response to the Lewiston tragedy. I was hired by the Office of the Attorney General in 2021 to develop the Victim Witness Advocate Coordinator Program. This program provides training, technical assistance, policy analysis, and other measures to improve prosecution-based victim services statewide. In early October 2023, I became the Director of Victim Services and took on the additional responsibility of overseeing the Victims' Compensation Program. As Chair Wathen explained at an earlier commission hearing, the first victim witness advocates in Maine, known by the acronym VWA, were hired in the mid-1970s as part of a movement to address the needs of crime victims involved in the court system. Currently, Maine has 46 VWAs who work for the Office of the Attorney General, all 16 district attorney offices, Bangor Police Department, Portland Police Department, and the Penobscot Nation Tribal Court. Every county DA office has at least one VWA, and several counties have as many as 5. 3 county DA offices also employ trial assistants who provide basic victim services in addition to paralegal type responsibilities. These individuals, as well as DA restitution clerks, are served by my program as well. I am not responsible for hiring or supervision. VWAs in county DA offices are county employees, and all other VWAs are employees of the agency they serve. My role is to offer one-on-one support, plan and execute training, identify needs and concerns that are shared across the state, and to work to address those victim needs and VWA concerns on a system-wide level. Maine is one of only 2 states where homicide prosecutions are handled exclusively by the Attorney General's office. Homicide investigations are conducted exclusively by Maine State Police, Portland, and Bangor. The Attorney General's office has 2 VWAs for the general homicide caseload and 1 VWA assigned to unsolved homicides who occasionally works on new cases. Portland employs their own advocate assigned to Portland cases. VWAs typically begin outreach to surviving family members within 24 to 72 hours of the death notification, which is carried out by the investigating law enforcement agency. For all other victim cases, including attempted murder, domestic violence, sexual assault, and property crimes prosecuted by the DA offices or tribal prosecutors, VWAs or trial assistants are assigned locally to provide victim services. In non-homicide cases, VWAs typically begin outreach to victim survivors once the case is referred for prosecution or after the case is charged. The primary responsibility of a VWA is to help crime victims navigate the criminal justice system. They carry out the victim's right to notification about the proceeding, explain the process, and help the victim exercise their options to participate, including assisting victims with victim impact statements made at sentencing. VWAs assess victim needs, which might include crime scene cleanup, safety concerns, housing, or mental health treatment, and make referrals to other agencies in the community that can help address them. VWAs also help victims apply for the Maine Victims Compensation Program, which provides financial reimbursement up to $15,000 for uninsured crime-related medical, mental health, and security needs, including up to $4,500 for funeral costs. Throughout my testimony today, you will hear me use the words victim survivor or victim survivor. The term victim is a legal term of art that can denote a special status in state and federal law. With respect to the October 25th incident, we know that 18 people did not survive, and they left people who some call their survivors or surviving family members. The words victim and survivor have other common meanings as well. And in victim services, we try to honor how people self-identify as much as possible. How individuals self-identify is personal and can evolve over time. Therefore, you will hear me use both terms where possible to honor the diversity of views and experiences among those directly impacted. October 25th, 2023 was the first day of the annual Maine Prosecutors Association conference held in Bar Harbor. VWAs and prosecutors from across the state, as well as our partners in the Attorney General and the U.S. Attorney's Office, attend this conference to receive training. That evening, the Attorney General's office staff were gathered for dinner At approximately 7:30 PM, Assistant Attorney General Leanne Zania, the homicide prosecutor on call that evening, heard from Maine State Police Lieutenant Randy Keaton, notifying her of an active shooter incident in Lewiston with a high estimated number of casualties.
Cara, I'm just gonna ask you to slow down just a bit.
Of course, thank you, I'm sorry. She immediately notified Deputy Attorney General Lisa Marchese, who found me and the homicide VWAs who were present. Several members of the homicide unit of the criminal division gathered in a large room at the hotel and established a mini command post. The prosecutors decided our office would assist and monitor from Bar Harbor before heading to Lewiston in the morning. Deputy Attorney General Marchese engaged me and the victim advocates right away without knowing whether the case would resolve with a prosecution or with a deceased suspect, because several years earlier, Attorney General Fry instituted a practice of providing victim services in homicide-suicide cases, in addition to prosecuted cases. Even weeks and months after October 25th, when the time frame and nature of our work began to far exceed the typical murder-suicide case, Attorney General Fry and Deputy Attorney General Marchese did not hesitate to authorize our ongoing involvement. Within 10 or 15 minutes of first learning about the incident, it was clear we were facing a mass violence event that far exceeded the scope of any homicide case we had ever experienced in Maine. Prior to October 25th, I had attended trainings on mass violence victim response and learned many best practices for delivering services. A year earlier, I arranged for 20 VWAs to receive disaster psychological first aid. While internally we had some preparation in place, I knew that crime victim services were not yet addressed in any state mass violence plans. Early on in my tenure, I had initiated conversations with the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner and the Maine Emergency Management Agency to begin addressing this gap. I also knew that in other communities where mass violence occurs, even with an official victim response plan, it's not uncommon for the traumatic stress or the circumstances to cause those plans to be set aside. One step I took prior to October 25th was meeting with victim specialists from FBI's Boston division, along with Heather Putnam, who is responsible for strategic engagement and law enforcement coordination for the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Maine. Our goal was to learn about the resources available through FBI and how to engage those services. Based on what we already knew about the scale of the Lewiston incident, I knew Maine's existing resources would be overwhelmed. I recommended that Deputy Attorney General Marchese reach out to Maine State Police to deploy FBI victim services, if that had not already occurred. We learned via press reports that evening that Maine State Police bused surviving victims to a safe location away from the scene to be interviewed, and that information had gone out to the public that concerned family members could come to the Auburn Middle School to wait for more information. We prepared for the next day, anticipating the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner would complete identifications and Maine State Police would locate next of kin and make death notifications overnight, at which point our involvement would be needed. Knowing that word of the shootings would spread quickly via social media, I emailed all VWAs statewide and asked them to stand by for information. 2 of the OAG homicide advocates were at the conference. The third member of the homicide advocate team was out on an extended leave and would not return to work for many weeks. Joanna Stokinger, a former homicide advocate, was at the conference to give a presentation in her new capacity as an elder advocate with the Elder Abuse Institute of Maine. We asked Joanna to request permission from her agency to assist us. I also called Suna Shaw, the Portland Police Department advocate, who did the same. We are so grateful that Elder Abuse Institute of Maine and the Portland Police Department allowed Joanna and Suna to assist the victim services effort without hesitation. And these agencies continued to support their work with our team, even weeks and months later. I called VWAs from Androscoggin County and other nearby counties to ask them to prepare to come to Lewiston on Thursday, depending on what was needed. At this point, I was not anticipating how long it would take for the suspect to be found, and I expected the shelter-in-place order would be lifted by the morning so that we could start serving victims immediately. I left Bar Harbor at 5 a.m. on Thursday morning to travel to Lewiston. On the way there, I contacted Kelly McGillis, the director of the Victims Compensation Program, and Kelly is here with me today. Kelly and our claims specialist, Kim Ward, were ready. Years prior, Kelly had created a short form version of our victims' compensation application, specifically for mass casualty incidents, and set aside supplies so she and Kim could quickly establish a remote office to receive and process a high volume of completed applications efficiently. I also contacted one of the members of Maine State Police's Behavioral Health Unit to determine whether they had been deployed and to coordinate efforts. I connected with LCK Banks, who covers Androscoggin County, who directed me to come to Lewiston High School, where Maine State Police had established its command post. I contacted out-of-state colleagues, anticipating that we might need additional assistance. I also contacted Heather Putnam from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Although early reports suggested that this case would fall within state jurisdiction, Heather has a similar statewide scope of work and is an invaluable partner in devising victim-centered and trauma-informed responses to complex cases. I arrived at Lewiston High School at 8 a.m. and went to a classroom set aside for the chaplains and behavioral health. Additionally, 3 assistant attorneys general from the criminal division arrived to serve as a resource to state police in the homicide investigation. VWAs would arrive throughout the day. I had 3 goals. 1, continue to gather information on the scale and scope of the victim survivor impact. 2, organize a pathway for VWAs to be able to provide services when the time came. And 3, ensure that a family assistance center was established as soon as possible. I continued making calls throughout the morning and tried to gather more information about the impacted population through the Maine State Police team coordinating the death notification process. As advocates began to arrive and prepared to meet with victims, I briefed them on what we knew and reminded them to continue taking care of themselves. I was concerned that over half of our VWA workforce statewide has less than 5 years of experience in advocacy, not because I doubted their ability to be compassionate and competent in their roles, but because of the horrific nature of the stories they would soon encounter. I first learned that morning that some of the deceased victims were deaf. We discussed some basic practices for serving deaf victim survivors, such as not making assumptions about language needs and to avoid using family members as ASL interpreters. With that said, given how rarely we encounter deaf people in the criminal justice system, and not because deaf people don't experience victimization, but for a host of other reasons that tie back to social marginalization, I was concerned about how best to ensure that our advocacy work did not cause additional harm. Throughout the rest of the afternoon, each time Maine State Police completed a death notification, An OAG homicide advocate would gather whatever information was known about the deceased person and their family and initiate contact with them. In some ways, these initial conversations between next of kin and advocates followed the typical pattern of a homicide case. Answering questions about how the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner conducts autopsies and releases the deceased bodies to funeral homes, providing information about the investigation that can be shared, and explaining why other information cannot be shared. Sometimes surviving family members have never experienced the death of a loved one before and need help with the basic first steps of planning a funeral and filling out paperwork. If nothing else, advocates listen and offer support while people process all the emotions that come with the violent and unexpected loss of a loved one. Grief and loss are typical reactions to traumatic events. While we often make mental health counseling referrals for those who need it, research has shown that we don't have to pathologize the experience of grief and loss to provide meaningful support in the form of psychological first aid. Most people just need someone to be there and listen. In Lewiston, the pace and challenges of the homicide advocacy work were amplified by the sheer volume of surviving family members that needed support and the outside demands on the families for information about their loved ones. They attempted to grieve under a worldwide lens. While perhaps none of us felt safe outside our homes when the suspect was still at large, many family members of the deceased also didn't feel safe inside their homes as national media staked out their front doors and backyards looking for news. Meanwhile, it was extremely difficult in the chaos to get accurate information that we could use to reach out to those who were injured or to those who were present at either of the two scenes, but did not experience physical injury. Throughout the day on Thursday, I continued to assemble VWAs at Lewiston High School so that we were prepared to make contact, but still did not have a definitive victim list, and also wanted more to be able to share about available resources. The other challenge was the shelter-in-place order and the concern for the safety of advocates leaving the high school to meet with victims in person while the suspect was still at large. A VWA from Androscoggin County DA's office traveled with DA Neil McLean and an assistant attorney general, along with a law enforcement accompaniment, to meet with a family that called a police department in another community asking for assistance. It was a successful interaction and much needed, but I was concerned that this provision of resources would not be sustainable given the high number of people estimated to be present between the two scenes and the strain on law enforcement resources statewide tied up with the manhunt. It's important to note here that we immediately considered everyone who was present, regardless of injury, to be crime victims under the federal mass violence definition and our state victims compensation program guidelines. We adopted FBI's vocabulary for describing what would become 4 groups of victims: next of kin of the deceased, or NOK, physically injured, or PI, or injured, present not injured, or PNI, and secondary victims, also just family, which included all immediate family members of the direct victims belonging to any of the other categories. These categories are imperfect, and they do not reflect the personal experiences of many who would not place themselves in any group apart from others who also survived that night. They also don't reflect the unique experience of those who belong to multiple categories, which this commission has heard. The categories don't reflect the experiences of deaf Mainers who were not playing cornhole that night, but who lost childhood classmates, and lifelong friends, and felt targeted and afraid as a community. These categories don't address the re-traumatization of those who have come to Lewiston and Auburn fleeing violence in their home countries and who endured 2 days of lockdown. They don't capture the fear experienced by domestic violence survivors throughout the state, imagining how their partners might be capable of similar acts, or whose partners actually threatened similar acts in the days and weeks that followed as a tool of coercive control. However, this method of categorization is commonplace, and it allows victim service providers to triage needs and direct resources according to various guidelines that may exist, such as who can access the victim's compensation program and for which benefits. This methodology also might appear to coincide with the way the public tends to focus the most attention on those who died and those who suffered gunshot wounds, but not other physical or psychological injuries when something like this happens. However, as I will describe in more detail, we continue to work to ensure that support and services are available to everyone who was present at either scene, to everyone who lost a loved one, and even to those who experienced other incident-related impacts, albeit with a patchwork of resources. Ultimately, in a small and interconnected state like ours, and especially in the wake of a 2-day lockdown and manhunt for a dangerous suspect, it's hard to imagine any person in Maine who was conscious of these events and was not impacted in some way. Even as I continue to detail the state government approach to providing support, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that the process of healing and resilience belongs to all of us here in Maine. And some of the best tools, connection, stories, laughter, breaking bread, singing, crafting, board games, and physical activity can be pursued without advocates involved. We hope people will use these tools too. My last goal on Thursday, the first full day after the incident, was to ensure that plans were in place to establish a Family Assistance Center, or FAC. An FAC is a large physical space where everyone impacted by a mass shooting can come in person to receive all the various forms of assistance they may need under one roof. I knew that quickly establishing an FAC is a national best practice. By the time I arrived on Thursday, October 26th, Maine State Police had requested that the FBI Victim Services Division take on this task, which I fully supported. Later that day, I met Amanda Allen, a victim services supervisor from FBI headquarters, who deployed from Washington, D.C. to lead the FAC effort. Her team would tour potential sites in the area throughout the afternoon, evaluate their suitability according to what she described as FBI best practices, and let me know which site they selected. Meanwhile, I was receiving pressure from various state actors to give assurance that an FAC would be open on Friday and to provide information about the location to share with the public. Dispatch continued to receive calls throughout the day on Thursday from people asking about friends and loved ones, and they wanted to be able to share a resource with them. Ultimately, we provided the phone number for one of our homicide advocates for dispatch to share that day, but it didn't resolve the bigger challenge of how to provide psychological support and tangible resources. If nothing else, when something like this happens, there's a human urge to gather and provide mutual support, and I was eager to fulfill that need. By Thursday evening, FBI shared that they had selected the Lewiston Armory as the location for the FAC. I was surprised because I understood that Maine State Police transported survivors to the Armory to be interviewed in the immediate aftermath that night. And it would be re-traumatizing for some to return to that location for services. Indeed, over the months that followed, many survivors with whom I worked have expressed their dismay about the armory location. However, my understanding is that decision came about after exploring many different options, and ultimately, the armory was the best location to meet the need for a large, centrally located, accessible space with smaller private rooms available for meetings. Unfortunately, I don't have more to offer on this point, other than to share in the concern that some of those who needed services the most did not receive them right away because of the lack of psychological safety at that location. A key lesson learned is that one of the most important things any community can do to plan for future crisis events is to identify in advance multiple options for FAC locations. There are ample federal resources available to support this type of planning. Ultimately, FBI Victim Services was and continues to be an essential partner, and we cannot imagine how this response might have ended up without their compassionate, professional, and comprehensive assistance. I trust that FBI made the best possible decision for the FAC location with the options presented in the moment. On Friday morning, October 27th, Detective Greg Mitchell, who was assigned by Maine State Police to serve as Director of Victim Services for the operation, instructed me to report to the Armory at 9 a.m. Throughout the morning, I joined the FBI Victim Services team, Detective Mitchell, and his supervising lieutenant, Darren Crane, representatives from the American Red Cross, and others to help plan for the opening of the FAC. One of the challenges addressed early on was whether to open, one of the challenges that came up early on was whether to open the FAC that day while the suspect remained at large, or whether to wait until the danger had cleared. According to Amanda Allen, it would be unprecedented for an FAC to open under these circumstances, given the safety concerns. Maine State Police and FBI made the decision to open the FAC the following day, on Saturday, October 28th, and information was shared with the press to notify the public later that afternoon. Staff from FBI and the American Red Cross continued to assemble at the Armory facility throughout the day on Friday. Those agencies would be best situated to fully describe the resources deployed, but I can explain the parts that I witnessed. The FBI Victim Services Division deployed a victim services response team comprised of approximately 50 FBI staff, each of whom was assigned to one of several teams, including direct victim services, information technology and victim data collection, ASL interpretation, and the cataloging and return of personal effects. The American Red Cross coordinated a host of volunteer services and financial assistance and worked with the Salvation Army and other local businesses to offer 3 meals a day for all of the impacted community who visited the FAC, as well as staff and volunteers providing support. Red Cross volunteers also provided manual labor to set up tables and chairs and partitions within the open space of the main gymnasium area. They also cleaned up the site after the FAC closed. Meanwhile, Tri-County Mental Health and the city of Lewiston opened a crisis mental health drop-in site at the Ramada Inn to provide services to the wider impacted community. Detective Mitchell assigned me to continue coordinating state victim services. Still awaiting injured lists Thursday morning, advocates from the Androscoggin County DA's office helped 2 homicide advocates prepare a space at the Auburn Superior Court building for in-person meetings with next of kin who were deaf and required ASL interpretation. In these early days, the Maine Association for the Deaf and Disability Rights Maine rapidly built beautiful systems to facilitate communication and provide support. The story of this work is outside my scope today, but people like Matt Webster, Tommy Minch, Emily Blatchley, Sitara Sheikh, Terry Morrell, and Kevin Boylan, and too many ASL interpreters to name, stepped up to advocate while they also grieved the loss of their friends. With Attorney General Fry's unwavering support, Deputy Attorney General Marchese and I assembled what would become 3 teams of VWAs plus the victims' compensation team. With Attorney General Fry's unwavering support, Deputy Attorney General Marchese and I assembled what would become 3 teams of VWAs plus the victims' compensation team. The homicide team provided ongoing support for next of kin and surviving family members of the deceased. The team was comprised of Michelle Cram and Jamie Miller from OAG, Suna Shaw from Portland PD, and Joanna Stokinger from Elder Abuse Institute of Maine. Each of the 4 Maine VWAs worked with 4 families. 2 families had 2 deceased family members, and so they worked with 16 families total, not 18. 3 VWAs from the New Hampshire Department of Justice and a victim specialist from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of New Hampshire deployed on Friday, October 27th. And we assigned each member of the New Hampshire group to work alongside one of the Maine VWAs as a second set of hands and backup. We knew that the Maine homicide VWAs would still need to tend their ongoing caseloads, which can mean days or even weeks away at court hearings or trials as far away as Machias or Caribou. In the 2 months immediately following October 25th, an additional 8 homicide cases across the state were referred to the AG's office for prosecution, which also required time away for the Maine VWAs as they met with new families. Words cannot express how grateful we are to the New Hampshire Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of New Hampshire for their assistance over many weeks' time, which ensured that Lewiston victims had someone who knew them from the beginning, who could be there for them even when the assigned Maine VWA was not available. District Attorney Neil McLean stepped up immediately to offer VWAs and trial assistance from 2 of his county offices to provide ongoing support for injured victims and as needed support for victims who were present at either of the 2 scenes but were not physically injured. Deputy District Attorney Kate Bozeman led this team. On Friday, October 27th, 4 DA advocates, Jessica Kanah, Courtney Pichard, Faith Robbins, and Sarah Catton, matched up with FBI victim specialists to meet with victims and their families at hospitals, and in at least one instance at their homes. Even after FBI left, the hospital visits continued for weeks, and in some cases, months. Androscoggin County has one of the most challenging caseloads in the state, and DA advocates would rush from hospital visits to office to courtroom. Like the homicide VWAs, the DA advocates also formed a backup team, which included Courtney Robarge, Joanne Campbell, Jacqueline Selewski, and Kayla McCaddy. A 3rd team of VWAs provided psychological first aid support and resource navigation to victim survivors and family members who came to the FAC, and later to those seeking assistance at the Maine Resiliency Center. They worked in teams of 2 to 6 during 4 to 8 hour shifts that I coordinated via email and phone calls with the assistance of Heather Putnam. Heather steadily took on the role of being my backup, orienting advocates to their shift, serving as the team captain, working with FBI victim services on unique case challenges, and organizing the schedule. Again, words cannot express our gratitude to our federal partners who continually asked the question, what can we do? The FAC group was comprised of more than 20 VWAs who came from as far away as Machias and Holton, representing 12 counties. This team also benefited from the expertise of a crisis response team comprised of 6 highly trained volunteer advocates, including an advocate fluent in ASL, who deployed at our request from the National Organization for Victim Assistance. The Immigrant Resource Center of Maine also provided a table at the FAC and later at the Maine Resiliency Center, with trained advocates available to provide multilingual, culturally specific advocacy services. Again, it's important to recognize the impact of this tragedy on immigrant, refugee, and the new American population. And as Fatuma Hussein, their executive director, reminded me, Lewiston is their community too. We were fortunate to have their expertise available. Kelly McGillis and Kim Ward from the Victims Compensation Program set up a table where her team could help people fill out applications and explain the program to victims. They were assisted by several VWAs, as well as the Victim Services team from the Maine Department of Corrections, community-based advocates from Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Services, and Lisa Bickelhaupt, the director of the Iowa Victims Compensation Program, who was vacationing in Maine at the time of the incident and spent her last 2 days before flying home assisting us at the FAC. Friday evening, I received a call from Deputy Attorney General Marchese notifying me that Robert Card was found in Lisbon, dead of an apparent suicide, and that there would be a press conference later that evening to announce this news. The homicide VWAs scrambled to notify family members of the deceased before they learned about it through other means, trying to do so as simultaneously as possible. But in many instances, they were unsuccessful because the information was leaked before the official press conference. This scenario is representative of a challenge we continue to encounter to this day, attempting to quickly provide accurate information to people about developments in the case, many of whom do and should feel entitled to be the first ones to know, and to help prepare them for news in advance, when ultimately we cannot control whether our office is notified with enough lead time. Maine State Police has been and continues to be an excellent partner, providing advance notice when they can. But in this situation, the potential sources of information extend far beyond them, such as the release of information from New York law enforcement officials or from Robert Card's family. Even when we do have advance notice, a few hours of lead time is not enough time to contact hundreds of people. In the meantime, we've had to reset expectations and help victim survivors devise plans to protect themselves from the barrage of re-traumatizing news and social media posts in ways that don't cause them to become completely isolated from the rest of the world. We have struggled to get this piece right. It's another way this case is unlike any other we've encountered. One of the unmet needs that arose after Maine State Police located Robert Card's body and closed the command post at Lewiston High School was a consistent, secure, and private physical location where the homicide VWAs could set up their laptops and meet with families of the deceased. Learning of this need from Androscoggin County DA Neil McLean, Bates College President Gary Jenkins, and Treasurer Jeffrey Swift allowed our staff to use a vacant building on campus and filled it with furniture and supplies. We continued to use this space as a base of operations for 2 months, and we are so grateful to Bates College for their hospitality and support. On Saturday, October 28th, the FAC opened at 10 a.m. FBI and Red Cross applied national best practices to devise a system for victim survivors entering the space. Guests were greeted by a Red Cross volunteer who would determine how each person was impacted and whether they required ASL interpretation. The FAC was available for those who were present at either scene, who had come to provide support for someone who was present, or who were immediate family of a deceased victim. All others were directed to the community mental health space at the Ramada Inn. Anyone who came was offered tangible resources, including information on common trauma reactions and how to talk to children about a shooting. A navigator, either an FBI victim specialist, a VWA, or both, would then sit with victim survivors and their supports and complete an intake and needs assessment. As the commission has heard, many people who were present at either of the two scenes fled in the chaos. When victims arrived at the FAC who were present that night but had not been interviewed, an FBI agent or a detective from Maine State Police would conduct an interview in one of the separate rooms at the Armory. The FBI or advocate navigator then helped lead the victim survivor around to receive each of the services available that they requested, which included victims' compensation, immediate financial assistance in the form of gift cards, trauma-informed childcare that allowed adults to have adult conversations, psychological first aid and spiritual care, legal services, and educational resources. 2 facility dogs, supported by handlers from FBI and the Harvard Police Department, provided psychological support. Maureen Boston and Tom Fritz from Pine Tree Legal Services organized teams of lawyers to provide legal advice clinics at the FAC and make referrals to pro bono attorneys for more complex issues. They responded extraordinarily quickly. Working with Volunteer Lawyers Project, Maureen continues to provide an intake hub for victim survivors with unmet legal needs. The most pressing legal question early on was how and whether victim survivors who receive public benefits should accept financial gifts, given the potential risk of losing their benefits as a result. With some victim survivors receiving larger sums in more recent months, pro bono attorneys around the state have helped victims set up special needs trusts to accept financial gifts, while partners at Androscoggin Bank and Bangor Savings Bank stepped up to provide free financial planning assistance and make referrals to tax professionals. Another service provided at the FAC was the return of personal effects. FBI cataloged 475 non-evidentiary personal effects items from Maine State Police and the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. Items like purses and wallets, car keys, bowling balls, cornhole bags, and pool sticks, and used a sophisticated system to identify the rightful owner and arrange for return, cleaning, and/or destruction upon request. BWAs and FBI victim specialists provided support throughout this intensely emotional return process. FBI also offered services to the impacted businesses. The FAC remained open for 6 days from October 28th through November 2nd, which I have learned is a typical time frame for an incident of this magnitude. The FAC served over 200 individuals. One important function of the FAC, beyond providing services, is to identify victim survivors who fled the scene so that we can continue to offer services and communicate key information in the weeks and months to come. Since October 25th, the DA VWA team has served 33 people who were physically injured. This number is greater than 13 because it includes all of the people who experienced injuries other than gunshot-related injuries, such as muscle sprains, muscle tears, and lacerations. We also learned through FAC intake and Maine State Police reports that at least 87 people were present and not physically injured. Although we know that most of these individuals, including many children, continue to cope with the psychological harm and survivor's guilt related to what they witnessed. The Victims' Compensation Program has received 114 direct victim applications related to the incident. The program typically receives about 200 applications a year. And an additional 115 secondary victims are receiving benefits through those 114 direct victim applications. With only a few exceptions, all of the new applications were collected at the FAC. The program reimbursed all funeral costs up to $12,000, which included an additional $7,500 available through the governor's office for funeral costs that exceeded the $4,500 victims' compensation cap that ordinarily applies to homicide cases. Throughout this time, I worked on what I call planning forward, anticipating challenges that might arise and working with local and national experts to plan for how to address them with existing resources. The Maine Coalition to End Domestic Violence and the Maine Coalition Against Sexual Assault, for example, helped provide advice when we considered a possible hotline for victims and survivors to call, but ultimately did not need when the DA's office stepped up to receive calls. When a mass violence incident of this magnitude happens, the Department of Justice Office for Victims of Crime, or OVC, deploys a team of consultants from its Training and Technical Assistance Center. We call this the OVC TTAC team, federal acronyms, to offer its expertise in devising both short and long-term victim response schemes. The consultants also help the state prepare an application for the non-competitive grant under the Anti-Terrorism Emergency Assistance Program, or AEAP. The consultant team assigned to Maine arrived within days and provided immeasurable support, gathering and educating community partners to plan for next steps. Attorney General Fry authorized our office to serve as the state administering agency for the AEAP grant, and we anticipate receiving funds starting in January 2025. With support from the OVC TTAC team, Heather Hunter and Brian O'Malley from the city of Lewiston moved mountains to help prepare for the closure of the FAC. They pulled in Jim Martin, CEO of Community Concepts, Inc., or CCI, and Danielle Parent, then Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives for CCI, to open the Maine Resiliency Center, or MRC, or the Resiliency Center, in the former LL Bean call center space at 184 Main Street. Opening a resiliency center is a national best practice, and while each one is designed differently to reflect the unique needs of the community, the general concept is that they serve victim survivors, the broader impacted community, and first responders. And they foster healing and resiliency through one-on-one support, resource navigation, support groups, wellness activities, outreach, education, and connection. A resiliency center is a hub for support, but its programs and activities can live beyond the four walls of the physical space to meet community needs as they evolve. Resiliency work is essential, not just for the individuals who benefit, but for the health and well-being of the entire community. In addition to those most directly impacted, at least 50 area businesses full of patrons, from restaurants to dance studios, were ordered to shelter in place that night. I've already mentioned the impacts to the immigrant population in Maine, the deaf and hard of hearing community, domestic violence survivors, not to mention other survivors of homicide. I often say in my work that trauma is contagious. The ripple effect is so widespread. Given that most people who commit crimes have a history of victimization, we know that victim service work and resilience building in the face of trauma can interrupt the cycle of harm. Resilience work is crime prevention work. Resilience work is substance abuse prevention work. There are experts on this commission who know even more about this topic than I do. Dr. Ng also knows that a resiliency center still exists in Newtown, Connecticut, over 10 years after the mass shooting there. The AEAP grant offered by OVC can help provide seed money for the first 2 to 3 years after a mass violence event. But the funding cannot cover all of the immediate needs like food and certain supplies, and it can take over a year for the funding to flow to the state. Ultimately, resiliency centers require a blend of public, private, and in-kind support to fully fulfill their mission. The Maine Resiliency Center opened on November 13th, 2023, less than 2 weeks after the FAC closed. Only the city of Orlando, after the Pulse nightclub shooting, opened a resiliency faster than Lewiston, Maine. And Orlando had the resources of the Disney Corporation to make it happen. There are communities in this country that still don't have resiliency centers 1 and 2 years after their mass casualty event. CCI would be best situated to explain all of the local agencies and businesses that came together to pull this off and everything they did. But I know it could easily consume a half day of testimony on its own. I was at the Resiliency Center almost every day that the center was open for the first 2 months. As CCI worked to build a budget and hire staff, Heather Putnam and I helped coordinate the 3rd team of VWAs who drove from all over the state to provide psychological first aid and resource navigation alongside volunteers from the Red Cross and community-based advocates from Disability Rights Maine, Safe Voices, and Immigrant Resource Center of Maine. Day after day, I witnessed dozens of people come into the center for someone to talk to, or to get help finding a counselor for themselves or their child, or who couldn't go back to work and needed help paying their bills, or people who just needed a place to sit quietly and feel safe. Several people came to the center between their regular counseling appointments just for the sake of being around other people who understood what they'd been through. As the news media went away and most Mainers went back to their normal lives, many described feeling like the world was going along without them, and they were stuck, unable to move forward. First and foremost, advocates would listen and validate their experience. From there, based on the needs presented, they would help connect people to resources. But fundamentally, the center is a place for connection and for people with shared experiences to build community. And the hope is that more and more the impacted community will inform the center's future offerings. My role was to facilitate the transition from the FAC to the Resiliency Center and to coordinate communication and devise systems to support all the various teams providing services. It was miraculous that the Androscoggin County DA's office agreed not only to maintain the injured caseload in a non-prosecuted case, but also to serve as the official advocacy contact for all other present not injured victims after the closure of the FAC until the Resiliency Center opened. In most instances, their work has continued far beyond the Resiliency Center opening. The DA office team has served at least 36 psychologically injured survivors, in addition to the 33 physically injured and their loved ones, for a total of at least 89 direct and secondary victims served. Since October 25th, the homicide team has served at least 132 surviving family members and friends of the deceased, including many who were also present at one of the 2 scenes that night. Another key example of local agencies stepping into the gaps involved the quick work of Heather Hunter at the City of Lewiston, Neil Kiley, CEO of Androscoggin Bank, and Shanna Cox, CEO of the Lewiston Auburn Metro Chamber of Commerce. Together, they ensured that financial donations directed toward the city from across the country and around the world had a way to get into the hands of victim survivors who needed help most. The Maine Community Foundation also quickly established a parallel effort. What emerged was a system whereby large financial gifts for victim survivors would be distributed by the steering committee for the Maine Community Foundation's Lewiston Auburn Area Response Fund. The steering committee held press conferences and a town hall meeting to gather input on their protocols and created a website where anyone in the community could provide their email address to receive updates or give feedback directly. I wanted to give the interpreters a chance to switch. My understanding is that the application and distribution process for mass violence response funds like this one can take many months in order to develop a distribution protocol with community feedback while accumulating a large corpus of donations and verifying applications to prevent fraud. But in the days and weeks in between, when many victim survivors were presenting with unpaid bills, the Chamber of Commerce Foundation stepped up to administer the One Lewiston Fund initially held by Androscoggin Bank. Victim advocates and the Victims Compensation Program vetted requests based on the Chamber's criteria and helped victims gather and submit documentation. And then the Chamber Foundation would cut checks directly to landlords, mortgage lenders, and car insurance companies. At the end of January, the remaining funds from the One Lewiston Fund went to the Lewiston Auburn Area Response Fund to be pooled and distributed to victims and survivors through that process. The Chamber Foundation also managed several other donor-advised funds that provided financial gifts to victims, and I helped the Chamber connect those gifts with the intended beneficiaries. A major part of my role throughout the past 6 months has been helping to manage the outpouring of generosity and the sincere desire of dignitaries to offer condolences, both locally and nationally, while at the same time upholding the victim's statutory rights to confidentiality and taking into account that many victim survivors wish to grieve and heal in peace. Every time a VWA calls a victim, even with good news, it can be a re-traumatizing reminder of why that person is calling in the first place. I became a point person for politicians wishing to meet with victims or send condolence notes, and for businesses and other entities wishing to make tangible, non-financial gifts, such as the Dead River Company, which offered to make free deliveries of 100 gallons of home heating oil or propane to victims' homes, and the Boston Bruins and New England Patriots organizations, which chartered special trips to see games and meet players. I helped funnel tangible gifts through the Resiliency Center, which distributed dozens of Thanksgiving baskets complete with frozen turkeys, tickets to Gardens Aglow at the Maine Botanical Garden, and later Christmas trees from Broadway Gardens, to name a few of the generous gifts provided to families both locally and from around the country. In each instance, I would work with the contact to understand the scope of the request or gift. How does the person sign up? What are the logistics? What exactly does the gift entail? And then I would ask the most difficult question. What do you mean by victims? Do you mean the surviving family members of the deceased or just the legal next of kin? Many of the deceased victims were loved by beautiful family structures, both chosen and biological. that could include up to a dozen or more people and did not fit the image of a single grieving spouse that might otherwise come to mind. I also might ask, when you say injured, are you including all 33 injured or just the 18 people reported to be shot? I also asked if the donor wanted to include the 87 people with psychological impacts too. I tried to ensure that any events included ASL interpretation. Before calling me, many donors already planned their gifts based on what they knew from press reports. There were 18 people who died and 13 injured. Most were willing to expand their generosity even further upon learning the actual extent of the victimization. However, ultimately, I was not responsible for those decisions. And once the requesting entity set the parameters for who could access the gift or event and how, they would write up an information sheet and I would share it with the relevant advocate teams. The advocates or the MRC, in turn, would reach out to victims and help them access the offer. Advocate involvement in the process was especially important, not only for protecting victim contact information, but also to provide victims with some assurance that the gift or event had been vetted by our office. Again, scams and fraud are not uncommon in situations like this. Early on, this work was especially difficult for the advocates. Advocates had to call families who were planning funerals or sitting by their loved one's bedside in the hospital to ask if they wanted to meet President and Dr. Biden, for example. We didn't want to deprive anyone of an opportunity that was presented, and our understanding is that the various visits, letters, gifts, and events were very meaningful to those who said yes. But interrupting people's grieving and healing to communicate each ask was a delicate process. The work of the Homicide VWA and DA VWA teams remains ongoing, especially as surviving families and victims digest the work of this commission and participate through their testimony and letters. In a typical murder-suicide case in Maine, victims and survivors do not have a meaningful opportunity to be heard, as they might in a prosecuted case with a sentencing at the end. And I'm grateful to the Commission for your willingness to make the opportunity available in a flexible and accessible way. In mid-January, the Maine Resiliency Center hired Joanna Stokinger, a member of the OAG homicide team, and Monica Linder to serve as advocate navigators. Working together with the VWAs, we've developed a gradual transition of services from OAG and the DA's office to the Resiliency Center, reflecting the fact that as we move forward, more and more of the relevant information and supports will come through the center. With that said, we operate with a no wrong door policy. Even in a typical scenario, when a crime victim from the past calls one of our advocates, the advocate is available to talk and make referrals. The bonds formed through the professional advocate-victim relationship transcend any formal structures we could attempt to create to the contrary. To facilitate the transition, Mike Perry from the Androscoggin County DA's office and I called every psychologically injured victim who had not already come into the Resiliency Center and was not already receiving services through the DA's office to make sure they were aware of the services and resources available. Many people appreciated the call, but expressed not needing support for various reasons. And we asked those with unmet needs for their permission to share their contact information with the center. The process of sharing victim contact information with the center for those not already connected has been labor-intensive for all parties involved. However, victim privacy is a top concern for us. The Resiliency Center now carries an extensive caseload between the P&I victim referrals and their increasing work with the surviving next of kin, the injured survivors, other directly impacted community members who were not present, and all of their families and supports. Over the first several months in operation, the Resiliency Center developed internal systems for collecting and protecting victim contact information. Now that this work is complete, the MRC has diversified their outreach to victims to include an email listserv, social media channels, and a website. I continue to work closely with the Resiliency Center to ensure collaboration. One of the challenges that can come with the way the brain processes trauma is the difficulty many victims have remembering who has reached out to offer assistance, who they've worked with previously, and the names of all of the different agencies involved. We try to address this challenge by convening regular advocate check-ins and working together on individual cases where we have permission to share information. Some victims, however, have not given permission for us to share their information with the MRC, which might impact the information they receive about the services available there. I also meet weekly with a representative of the Department of Health and Human Services to stay up to date on their efforts to address gaps in mental health services for those directly impacted in Lewiston, and to ensure that our victim service work complements community level and statewide mental health and wellness initiatives. On the horizon, many victims have expressed concerns about the possibility of their crime-related expenses, like lost wages, mental health counseling expenses, and medical copays, eventually exceeding the $15,000 statutory cap that applies to all crime victims in Maine who access the program. All state and territorial compensation programs place a cap on the total compensation awarded to individual victims to ensure that funds remain available for all who need them. However, my understanding is that the governor's proposed budget included the new Maine Mass Violence Care Fund that was adopted by the legislature and will be available to augment the financial assistance available through victims' compensation exclusively for mass violence victims and survivors. The Victims' Compensation Program will provide more information to recipients as this program develops. One of the big challenges that remains is tending to the wellness of advocates who have worked so hard for so long with very little room to breathe. During the first month, many advocates on the DA and OAG teams worked 16-hour days and answered calls 24/7. Today it has been 6 months, but the tragedy is far from over for survivors, and so the work continues. Even before October 25th, statewide efforts to clear the backlog of criminal cases in the court system due to the COVID-19 pandemic have meant an onslaught of trials and what the courts have called blitz events, where hundreds of cases are called one at a time to try to push resolutions. Advocates in many counties have struggled to fulfill prosecutors' victim rights obligations with little notice and no additional staff. Furthermore, when I surveyed advocates in 2022, over half were working second and third jobs to support their incomes so that they could fulfill their passions to work in victim advocacy. Needless to say, attrition was a concern before October 25th, and it is one of my greatest worries now. I also know this concern is shared for a variety of reasons among all the various professions, including law enforcement, medical examiner staff, fire and ambulance, medical and behavioral health, community-based advocacy, and the ASL interpreters. A portion of the AEAP grant funds that OAG will administer will be dedicated to providing wellness supports, outreach, and training specifically for all of these first responders. I remain concerned, however, about the size of the VWA workforce in Maine. And should another mass violence event happen again in another less populated county, I worry how we would provide advocacy services to all the impacted victims while continuing to fulfill our responsibilities to the thousands of other crime victims in Maine already relying on our services every day. I believe one of the most important steps to maximize our existing capacity is planning, training on the plan, and continuing to facilitate relationships across sectors and state boundaries. OVC TTAC recently granted our request to facilitate a comprehensive victim response review process. We will invite all key partners outlined here, including law enforcement, local victim service providers, and our federal counterparts. The review process can then feed statewide and local planning efforts. While one of our best strengths in this response was the expertise and relationships already forged through our unique system of homicide prosecution and our statewide advocacy network, the underlying challenge for the future is ensuring that we have strong local advocacy programs like the one in Androscoggin County that was willing to partner with our office without hesitation. To address this, I have offered to partner with the Maine Prosecutors Association to help develop mutual aid agreements across counties that are specific to victim services. Another challenge that we confronted, and something that I hope my testimony today will start to address, is a general lack of knowledge about the existence of Maine VWAs and the work they do. I've heard many victims say over the years, I didn't know VWAs existed until I needed one. I've worked with dozens and dozens of advocates, and while they tend to have no problem standing up for victims, they tend to be very quiet and humble when it comes to talking about themselves. Advocates want victims and their stories to be centered, not themselves. Sometimes even our most beloved colleagues and partners don't fully understand the VWA's actual work on a typical day. However, when mass violence cases present with such enormous victim impact and such complex victim needs, ensuring that the VWA is known and understood is vital. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Cara, can we get a copy of your written statement for part of the record?
I emailed it to Ann this
Great.
morning.
Thank you. Okay. Any questions for Cara?
Cara, first of all, thank you so much for what you and your folks have done. You know, you folks were thrust into an event that was unprecedented for all of you, and you all rose to the occasion in terms of taking care of the community. And this is not just from what we heard here, but I mean, so I have heard so many feedback from outside about what your team did and also what you did. So you stood up quite well, and you should be all very proud. And the most important thing is you need to take care of yourself, all of you. One question I have is, you highlighted a little bit about how you set up the Family Assistance Center and all that stuff. How were you folks ever involved in any training collaboration prior to this event? The state has done different conferences and different trainings, but have you folks ever been looped into any of those?
To my knowledge, Victim Services has never been engaged or invited in other sort of mass violence preparation exercises. I did receive outreach recently about a possible training exercise event. We've been invited to participate in that. But no, when I first came to Maine and came into this role, it was work that I had started to sort of get a seat at the table for us.
And I think some of the other tension you mentioned when the Family Assistance Center was set up, I think a large part of that probably is because people didn't know who you were. I think if people have planned and pre-played with you in terms of knowing what you folks can contribute, some of the message and who you are is going to be like much clearer. So they wouldn't be saying like, why you're here kind of thing like that. So, but again, great work for all of you. So.
Cara, Herculean. It's just, I'm at a loss for words at how thoughtful, comprehensive, just reaching out across many agencies that your work has been. And I am so grateful that you've come, because I just didn't know. I had no, we've heard glowing things about victim advocates from victims who have provided testimony here, but your statement today provided much clearer picture of just the enormity of the work that you've done. And I agree with Tony that, Dr. Ng, that, tragically, your profile has been elevated. And I think it is important that you henceforth have a seat at the table, because I think, I can't think of a more important victim resource than your efforts throughout this. We'll be writing a final report, as you know, but that will come out probably before any, I was struck by your comment toward the end about your review process that's coming up. Will a report be issued about that, do you think? Probably internally, maybe, but.
I don't, there won't be a formal report prepared or issued. I think my understanding of the process that OVCT Tech offers us is it's really a process to develop lessons learned. And in order to do that, I think we're gonna need to have some really candid conversations, right? So the way that they sort of style that process, there's not a formal report that's developed.
I mean, part of the reason I'm interested, first of all, but also, in our final report, there probably will be some information about certainly the impact on the deaf community, the impact on victims in all the categories that you mentioned, your work. And I think having a copy of your remarks will help us to sort of structure that in a comprehensible way. But anyway, I just want to thank you so much. This would have been wholly incomplete without your statement today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And we intend to time that review process after your report is released so that we have the benefit of all of your reflections and recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Jeff?
I'm going to somewhat echo what everybody else has said here today, but also based on my perspective as having worked in DA's offices for 37 years and knowing viscerally how important the advocates have been during that time. But what you were able to do in a case that was never going to go to court, the suspect was dead, there was never going to be prosecution, and all the resources that you marshaled to give advocacy and help to the people who needed it, truly extraordinary. And but just as a question or comment rather, the Attorney General's office has exclusive jurisdiction over homicides as we traditionally understand them to be. But isn't it correct that the DA's offices handle motor vehicle homicide cases?
Yes.
And because of that, the DA's office's advocates have experience in dealing with grieving families. And that was probably very important to your work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we train together how to work with grieving families. And that partnership, that ability for us to work together is essential.
And this is a question you may not be able to answer, but when we heard from the former chief medical examiner, he said that he was instructed by the state police not to make victim notifications of the homicide victims. And yet many of them learned about the death of their loved ones through social media. Were you aware of that restriction on the medical examiner's office?
I was not aware of that restriction. I just know that in a typical homicide case, it's customary for state police to facilitate, conduct the death notification process or it could be the other investigating law enforcement agencies, Portland or Bangor. And part of the rationale for that is that sometimes family members make spontaneous statements that could be relevant to an investigation. And then it's important to have a law enforcement officer present who can gather that information for reports.
But you're aware that this was upsetting to some family members.
It was extremely upsetting. And I witnessed phone calls coming into Lewiston High School, family members upset and wanting information. And I witnessed state police working quickly to try to provide death notifications.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
I
Toby,
just
go ahead.
want to thank you for your presentation here today, and I think this is I know there was confusion, there always will be confusion in these circumstances, but the fact that the county, state, and federal resources were all brought to bear on this is a great example of what can happen when people of goodwill work together. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for your thoughtful and thorough presentation here today. Anything else? All right, we're going to take a short recess, about 10 minutes, and then when we come back, we will start with Daryl Reed. The next witness will be Daryl Reed. Mr. Reed, would you raise your right hand, please? You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in these proceedings.
Yes.
Have a seat, please.
Good morning, Mr. Reed.
Good morning.
I'll be asking the preliminary questions, but my colleagues may have other questions when I get done.
Jeff, speak up. Is your mic on?
It's on.
In the past, when we've had Army Reserve members testify, they've all been members of law enforcement as well. So sometimes we confuse the ranks, but I understand you are not a member of law enforcement. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you are a member of the Army Reserve. And what is your rank?
Staff sergeant.
And I think the sergeants are often described as with a capital E with a hyphen after that and a number. What's a staff sergeant?
E6.
E6. How long have you been in the Army Reserve?
20 years.
And has all of your military service been in the Army Reserve?
I did 6 years active duty too.
Pardon me?
6 years active.
And did you ever get deployed overseas?
Yes, sir. I was in Afghanistan in 2010.
So for the last 14 years, you've been a member of the Army Reserve.
Yes, sir.
And you are a member now of B Company of the 3rd Battalion of the 304th?
Yes, sir.
And I think we've heard this described with different names for B Company. What do you call it?
Bravo Company.
Is it also referred to as bandit company sometimes?
Roger, sir.
Pardon me?
Yes, sir.
And what is your civilian profession?
I'm in accounting,
Do you work for yourself or for a firm?
a firm.
So as a member of the Bravo Company, and how long have you been in the 3rd Battalion of the 504th?
When I got back from Afghanistan, I moved to Maine, I believe it was 2012. And I joined up the unit shortly thereafter.
And as a member of that unit, did you become acquainted with Robert Carr?
Yes, sir. I believe it was my first drill. I believe it was his second drill that I met him.
And did you continue to be a colleague of his in this unit for all the time up until the evening of October 25th?
Yes, sir.
Did you speak to him outside drill time?
Yes, sir.
And was that a fairly regular feature that you conversed with him or communicated with him outside drill?
Yes, sir.
Did you believe you had a fairly good understanding of his basic personality and behavior?
Yes, sir.
And up until 2023, how would you describe him?
Up until I would say the very end of 2022, he was a normal guy. He was a quiet guy. Just normal, but the beginning of 2023, he got hearing aids and he started hearing voices. Like he started picking up like conversations across the room. He thought, people were talking about him in negative ways. And then it just progressed from there, from January up until July. The last time I spoke to him was July 16th, but those 7 months, he really like, he was fixated on people were talking about him behind his back.
And did you just say the last time you spoke to him was July 16th?
July 16th was the last time.
And I'll get to that in a few minutes, but before getting to that, while you were communicating with him, did he also tell you some of the things that he was doing or saying as a consequence of these voices?
Yeah, he quit his job because he thought they were talking about him so much that he, changed jobs, thinking that would, alleviate what he thought he was hearing. He would call me after drill. Like I'd drive an hour and a half to get home from Saco to Winthrop. And he would call me after drill, like while I was on the highway, while he was driving home. And he would just go on and on about people talking about him at the drill hall and, think people were talking about him at work, around the town of Bowdoin at the convenience store. But yeah.
And had you been in some of the locations where he claimed people were talking about him?
No, he invited me to go to the bowling alley in June. But my daughter had a softball game and I wasn't able to go. But no, I didn't see it.
But during the drill or what's called battle assembly, did he say fellow soldiers were talking about him?
Yes, sir. We pretty much sit in the same spot. It's like a long, narrow classroom. And we usually sit in the back at a table. And there's different like groups and the group all the way up in the front, like a good distance away, like 40 feet away, I'd say. He swore up and down that he overheard conversations. I would see him like fixated on it too. Like he would be looking up front and like listening with those hearing aids because he could pick up conversations across the room. But during those calls when on my way home from drill, I would ask him who said it. Just give me a name and I'll say something. I didn't want him thinking people were talking about him. And I would say something to somebody if they were, but he could never give me a name. It was just, he heard it in just in the noise within the room.
And you yourself never heard any of these disparaging comments?
No, sir, I didn't. I've never heard anybody say anything bad about him.
Was this conduct of his of complaining about these comments discussed by members of your unit?
We spoke about it like I said, we have our like groups that we hang out with mostly. Like we associate with everybody, but our buddy groups. But we spoke about it, between ourselves. I can't remember if it was brought up any farther than that. It was weird behavior. Like it was not normal, but it was just between us, just conversations between us.
And who were the other members of, I think what you call a buddy group, the people that you were more friendly with in the unit? Who were the others?
Sergeant First Class Humble, Staff Sergeant Wainwright, Staff Sergeant Noyes, Staff Sergeant Burt, Staff Sergeant Hodgson. I think that's it.
And when you talked about him leaving a job, this is a job at Maine Recycling,
I believe,
if you know.
yes, it was Maine Recycling, and then he went to work for, it was a trucking company that shipped bread up and down in New England.
And did he specifically tell you that one of the things he did at Maine Recycling was to take a photograph of himself?
Yes, so they had helpers, non-CDL drivers that would help like haul the bottles and stuff, empty out the trailers and load the trailers. And he thought they were all like, because there was a big group of them, and in the morning at the yard, they would congregate, and he swore up and down that they were, talking about him, and he overheard their conversations. And it got so bad that he actually took a picture of himself, and he showed it to people. And when he told me about that, I thought that was like just so out there. Like I can't, I even said to him, like, you can't do that, like you're gonna get in trouble. That's like sexual harassment. And
And specifically what he'd been complaining about is that people were calling him a pedophile.
yes, sir, a pedophile, a homosexual, and that he had a small package.
Meaning his genitalia.
Yes, sir.
So he had taken a photograph of his genitalia and showed it to people to try to discount that.
Yes, sir.
And you thought that that was extremely bizarre behavior,
Extremely inappropriate.
totally out of character with a Robert Card you'd known in past years.
Yes, sir. Like I said, prior to 2023, January, he was a very like normal, hardworking. He traded stocks. He liked to hunt. He loved to hang out with his son. They would ride jet skis, ride motorcycles. I like to ride motorcycles. Like he was just a normal, and I would say even more on like the quieter, more reserved side. Like I'm pretty outgoing. I like to joke around and laugh with the guys, but Card, he had to warm up to you to like open up. It was just how he was. He was a very, I don't know, like conservative that, he didn't put himself out there, I guess is the best way to put it.
And I think you said a moment ago that he traded stocks.
Yes, sir. He derivatives, puts and calls, like you bet against the stocks. He got onto some webinar, and you paid like $50 for the webinar, and the guy taught you how to trade stocks and derivatives. And
Did
then
he appear to be fairly successful at this?
very successful. He bought his jet ski cash. That jet ski was like $18,000 or something, but cash. Like he put on a brand new shed or a garage on a detached garage on his property, and he paid for it cash. So no, he's very successful with it.
Over the years, had he also discussed his collection of firearms?
Yes, yep. He would actually bring them in too. He got I personally saw it was some AR style rifle. I believe it was Coyote Brown too. It was just unique looking. It looked pricey. And a 45 he had. I saw that. He brought that in. He said he hunted and shot his whole life. He grew up on a farm. I'm originally from New Jersey. I didn't fire a gun until I joined the Army, but he was raised around it, and he really enjoyed it.
And among other things, did he discuss getting a night vision scope?
Yes, he got a thermal optic. He actually brought that in too. And I've worn some cool stuff in the Army, like Nas, like night vision goggles, but this thing, I've never seen anything like it before. It was a thermal, and I had a laser rangefinder on it, and you could record videos on it too. It was a decent size optic too. But he showed us the videos from on his cell phone, and like probably 300 meters out in his field, you could like see deer like clear as day too. But it was nighttime, so it was very. I've never seen anything like it, and It was expensive too. It was like $10,000 that he paid for it. I believe that's what he's told me. I'm not entirely sure, but it was up there.
Did he say what it was for?
Hunting coyotes and deer. He actually shot a deer with it. That's the video that he showed us.
So, turning your attention now to the spring, did you ever become aware that his family had spoken to a member of the Saginaw Sheriff's Department in May?
No, I didn't know about that until when did I know about that? I think that was after after July. I did know of a time that he was with his son and they went to a convenience store and he said something to the clerk at the convenience store and it like mortified his son. His son was like so embarrassed that he would even say something. I believe that was like around, it must have been around that time, like April, May timeframe. He even told me that his son was like embarrassed by it and that like it was like an outburst but he didn't have the wherewithal to, like knock it off. But I don't know, it was odd behavior.
Were you ever aware that First Sergeant Moat had talked to a deputy sheriff named Chad Carlton in May?
In May, no.
So was there any discussion within the unit about trying to get Robert Card some help?
I think
Until July.
until July, I didn't hear about anything until July.
So in July, did the unit go to the West Point, New York area?
Yes, sir.
And did you go there with other reserve members?
Yes, sir. I went down on Friday, I believe it was July 14th. And he was slated to come a day later because of work, the Saturday. But we got down there that Friday and went to Camp Smith to get our lodging. And they had a really bad storms there. So a lot of the roads were washed out, bridges were closed. It was chaotic to say the least. But it took us a little longer to get around and stuff. But yep, I was down there on July 14th.
So on July 15th, the following day, did Robert arrive?
Yes, sir.
Was he by himself?
Yes.
And did some events happen that evening that were disturbing?
Yes, sir. So when that Saturday, we got done with the range control and, getting everything ready for Monday. Monday, we were going hot and the cadets were going to be arriving. And we were just prepping everything. So later that night, I believe it was like 5 or 6 in the afternoon. We were in the pool. We got done and, we jumped in the pool. It was hot down there and we were swimming around and it was myself, Humble, Wainwright, Noyes, and Bert. And then Card pulled up. The parking's in the rear and you could see him pull up and he was walking up to the front desk with his bags. And we're like, hey, how you doing? Once you check in, get your bathing suit on, come down in the pool with us. And he's like, yeah, he was fine. So he put his bags away. I'd say a good like 15, 20 minutes went by. And he comes out of the door in his bathing suit with a towel and he hops in the pool with us. And we were just like, how you doing? What's going on? And the first thing that came out of his mouth was the lady at the front desk was talking about me. And we all kind of like looked at him a little, bewildered, but I'm like, well, what did she say? And he didn't like say specifically what she said, but like a roundabout way, like, oh, she knows I'm here and, she's talking about me. She recognizes me from last year because he stayed there last year. And we kind of just, I don't know, we looked between ourselves, like it was kind of weird, but we kind of just brushed it off. And then we're just normal conversation, just joking around. And then he blurted out that on his way down in Connecticut, he stopped out at Dunkin' Donuts and the lady behind the counter said something about him, like something derogatory along, what those same 3 things that he always fixated on. And I said to him, I had to say something now. I was like, Card, that lady doesn't know you. That lady sees thousands of people come off the highway every day, she doesn't know you from Jack, and it was weird, but the night progressed and we were going to get pizza. We were going to order Domino's pizza, but on base, you have to meet them down at the front gate. They're not allowed to just drive on post. So,
Yeah, let me interrupt there. So the place you were staying is actually part of an Army facility?
Yes, sir. It's a MWR. It's like a recreation lodging basically for soldiers.
And so it's controlled so that public can't just enter it.
No, sir.
You have to go by a gate and check in with some person.
Roger, they got force protection down there that check IDs and it's a little ways away from that. I'd say probably a good like mile and a half from the front gate. It's not a very big base, but I'd say it's larger than Camp Keys.
And if a service member goes through and has the proper identification, is the vehicle they're driving searched?
Some of them are, they do them randomly. None of us were searched when we went through, but they do vehicle searches there.
So throughout this period, that weekend, did you have any idea whether or not Robert Card had brought any of his personal firearms with him?
No, I had no idea.
So basically what you've described is that he was talking about events that were just like all the earlier events where he was claiming people were talking about him with the same disparaging terms, but these were just people, total strangers.
Total strangers.
And so you thought that that was basically delusional.
Yes, sir. It was extremely odd behavior. I had to say something the second time he said it too, because the lady in Connecticut, she has no clue who he is, you know.
So I think when I interrupted, you were saying you went down to the gate to get the pizza delivery.
Yes, so we
Okay.
decided to order Domino's, and we called it in, and then we were gonna go to the gas station too, right after that, it's right outside the front gate. And it was me, Wainwright, and Card said, I'll come with you. I gotta run to the gas station too. So we took Wainwright's truck down to the front gate.
And when you went to the gas station, what happened?
So on the way down to the gate to get the pizza, I was sitting in the front passenger, Wainwright was driving, and Card was directly behind me. It's a 4 quad cab truck. And like I said, it's about a mile and a half to the front gate, and nobody was saying a word. We weren't talking, we were just driving. And he said, I can't believe you too, Reed. Or he said something along those lines. And nobody was talking, like no words were said. And I turned around and I go, what? Like I didn't say anything. And I even said something to Wainwright. I'm like, Wainwright, did I say anything? And he's like, no. And Wainwright was so confused. He thought it was like a conversation that we had before AT, because nothing was said in the truck, but he thought that I said something derogatory about him in the truck. And he like turned like 180 degrees, like his teeth were gritting. And when I turned around, like I could see he was pretty amped up. And I thought I was going to get punched in the back of the head. Like that's how like mad he was. And I kept telling him, I was like, I didn't say anything. Like, dude, like what did I say? And he couldn't tell me, like he wouldn't tell me. And he's like, it's all right, I'll take care of it, like that. And I was so like weirded out by it. It was just so random. So we got the pizza, and I kept trying to talk him like what did I say? Like what's the matter, dude? And he wouldn't tell me. He just was quiet, like gritted his teeth. But I can tell he was on edge. So we went to the gas station, and the second Wainwright parked, he like flung the door open. He like storms into the gas station. I'm looking at Wainwright like what is going on right now? So I go in and Wainwright goes in, and he like flings open the cooler door and grabs a case of beer and like stomps up to the cashier. And I'm just like, I can't even talk to him because he's just like, he keeps walking away from me. So I go into the cooler, I get what I was getting, and then he paid first, then I paid next, and Wainwright was behind me. So when I walked out of the gas station, he put that case of beer on the ground and he was leaning up against the truck, the bed of the truck. And I came out, I said, hey man, what's going on? And I went to like grab the front door to like put it in, and he came at me like he wanted to fight. And since I was like towards the front of the truck, I kind of like turned around the front of it just to try to put some distance between us. But his fists were balled up. He wanted to fight. And I didn't want to hit him because nothing even happened, you know, I didn't say anything, and I just put some distance in between us. And And I did yell like, what's wrong with you? Like I cussed at him a few times, just because I was just like, why are you trying to fight me right now? And Wainwright came out by this time and he saw this whole situation going down, and Card's fists are balled up and he's fired up and he's not saying anything, but he was amped up. He was ready to go. And it just cooled down. Like I smoked a cigarette and we just like, he got into the truck when Wainwright hit the unlock button, and then I hopped in and I turned around and I was like, dude, what's going on? Like, what, I didn't say anything. Like, why are you trying to fight me right now? And his teeth are like grinding, like he's like ready, like to go. And I literally thought I was going to get punched in the side of the face, because I was sitting in front of him and we're in a little, a small area there. It would, but it was weird. It was definitely weird. So we drove up to the gate, checked in, and then drove to the lodging. And Wainwright parked, and Card grabbed his beers and slammed the door and just stormed off. And Wainwright and I were just looking at each other like, what just happened? So we went to the day room and told everybody, and it was odd. But Card went right back to his room. He didn't come out for the rest of the night. Like he didn't want to be around us for the rest of the night.
So did you tell a superior non-commissioned officer what had happened?
Yes, so we were all in the day room with the pizza and everything, and we are just talking amongst ourselves. And between, what he said in the pool about the people talking about him,
Hold on just a moment. Go ahead.
so between what he said in the pool about the people, the front desk lady, and then the lady in Connecticut, and then what just happened in the parking lot, and we were just talking amongst ourselves, Noyes, Wainwright, Burt, and Humble, that, he can't go out on the ranges. Like, what if he thinks a cadet said something about him? You know what I mean? And we have high explosive grenade rounds, and maybe we should get, the chain of command involved. And then that's when Wainwright went to go get Master Sergeant Yurek to let him know what happened. And yeah, so we did notify the chain of command.
So was the first superior non-commissioned officer Master Sergeant Yurek?
Yes, it was Master Sergeant Yurek was probably the highest ranking NCO at the lodging that night on the
And
15th.
was First Sergeant Moat present at that point?
No, First Sergeant was staying at Camp Natural Bridge, which is, with the bridges open, it takes about 15 minutes, but with the bridges closed, it took over an hour to get to Natural Bridge. So it was quite a distance. You had to go all the way up to Newburgh and then south on 9W to get to West Point.
So Master Sergeant Yurek was present, so he was the one you brought into this discussion.
Yes, sir.
And was he previously the first sergeant in Bravo Company?
Yes, sir.
So you'd worked with him or under him for many years.
I've known him since 2012.
And once you told Master Sergeant Yurek what had happened, what was the next step?
Master Sergeant Yurek went to his room to knock on the door that night, and just to talk to him, because he saw the concern with all of us, that what we saw, and our opinion that he shouldn't be around cadets. We didn't want him around West Point cadets. So we went to go knock on the door, and Card refused to answer. He stood there and knocked on the door for, it felt like, I don't know, probably like half an hour, and he just refused to answer the door. And Master Sergeant Yurek said that he wanted the rental car keys, to take the keys from him. And I believe somebody called the MPs down at the gate. They're not really MPs. They're like a gate guard, force protection. But they had a master key to all the rooms at the lodging. And I believe that's the only way they were able to get the door open, was with that master key, because he refused to open the door.
And once the door was open, what happened?
He looked like he was sleeping, like he had his shirt off. He was just in his PT shorts, and Master Sergeant Yurek started, what's happening? I heard about the situation with Reed. He just wanted to know what was going on, and just to, see what we were seeing. And I believe he thought it was alcohol related at first, but I come to find out that he only had 2 beers out of that 12-pack that he bought, so he wasn't intoxicated. But he was just acting very strangely.
Eventually, did Robert Card either become conscious or pretend to become conscious?
Yes, like I said, it looked like he was pretending to sleep, like his eyes were kind of, half open, and he was in his like pajamas. And he said he just wanted to sleep and to be left alone. And I think that's when the decision was just to let him go to bed. It was pretty late at that point. I'd say it was probably close to midnight at that point, and we had to get up to get the ranges ready. And
Excuse me, at some point had he tried to shut the door in your face and
he did with Yurek, like when they first got the door open, yeah, he tried to shut the door, he slammed the door. He just wanted to be left alone is what he was saying. But you don't do that when, Master Sergeant Yurek's talking to him. He's a senior non-commissioned officer. You have to talk to him. He outranks Card. And it was just very bizarre behavior.
so all of you agreed that you would let him sleep overnight and then deal with it in the morning?
That's what I believe, because I went to bed shortly thereafter. And when I woke up, when I woke up that next morning, there was state police and MPs and first sergeant, and the commander was on his way down. Like something happened that morning that like triggered all this to like get the state police involved. And I went downstairs, I believe it was like around 08 or 09. And I saw these cop cars, and I saw like they were all standing in like a huddle, the state police and the command team. But yep.
So that causes me to stop and ask a question I should have asked earlier. Have you looked at the body camera video of the New York State Police?
Yes, sir.
And you're visible in much of that video?
Yes, sir.
And so by looking at that video, was that helpful in refreshing your memory about all the events that happened that weekend?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever write a statement for law enforcement or for anybody else about this?
I don't believe we wrote a statement with them that day. I have written statements for the Army. This is one of them right here that we did at the unit. But I don't.
You wrote one for the Army investigation.
Yes, sir.
And you brought that with you today?
Yes, sir.
And that helped you also refresh your memory?
Roger, sir. It's the dates, like the dates and the days was a little fuzzy, but after going through like text messages and watching the body cams, yes, it's refreshed my memory.
Okay. And you're here under subpoena, is that right? You were served a subpoena to appear?
Yes, sir.
Did that subpoena direct you to bring documents with you?
Yes, sir.
And that's why you brought those documents?
Yes, sir.
Does that include text messages?
Yes, sir.
I don't think we've seen those, however, so you don't need to move right now.
Okay.
But if you could just ensure that we get copies of that before you leave here today.
Yes, sir.
And another topic that I didn't touch on earlier, during the 6 months before this, had you not only observed mental changes in Robert Carr, but also physical changes?
Yes, sir. He lost a lot of weight. He was by the time West Point started, he was like gaunt, like his cheeks were sunken, and even his eyes were like bulging out. Like he had this real wide-eyed expression. But he lost a lot of weight. He must have been. We were always like similar with PT, and just like right now I'm dieting to get ready for an Army school I leave for in May. But we would run together and stuff for PT. We were pretty similar, but and he was over 200 pounds. I'm over 200 pounds. But by that point, I would say he was at like 180 pounds. Like he lost so much weight that it didn't even look healthy. And I could tell that he was stressed by that point too. Like, he didn't look good.
And that is visible in the body cam video, his appearance?
Yes, sir. Yes.
So the next morning when you joined the group, that apparently the state police were already there.
Yes.
And did you provide some information to the troopers to help them in what they were trying to do?
Yes, sir. I told him exactly what I just said about the gas station incident, that he tried to fight me, that he said, I'll take care of it. It's okay. I'll take care of it, or something along those lines. And I remember like we spoke in that circle for, so long because the state police, their hands were kind of tied because he didn't make like a direct threat to hurt me or anybody else or himself. So they really couldn't do anything since like he didn't blatantly say like, I'm gonna, beat up Reed or whatever. And that's what it took a while to figure out like exactly what we were gonna do next. But luckily, the state police are, they they've been in these situations before and they could give us opinions and what we could do or what we should do. And yeah, so we decided to take him down to Keller Hospital.
And did that group discussing this include First Sergeant Moat as well as Master Sergeant Yurek?
Yes, everybody was there.
And was the collective decision eventually to get a command directed evaluation of Robert Card?
Yes, after the state police said that they couldn't like take him in custody because he didn't make any direct threats. He didn't assault me because I walked away. That's when the decision was to make the command directed, mental health evaluation. And the commander wasn't even supposed to, like, he wasn't on orders. He was starting his orders later, but he jumped in a car and head down right from New Hampshire because, it was a pretty big deal. And that morning too, I thought that was pretty cool. And yeah, then that we were trying to figure out if the commander had to be there in person to like sign it, or could we just get him checked in before the commander got there, just take a command directive over the phone. But there was a lot of discussion about that.
But eventually, I believe it was First Sergeant Moat or Master Sergeant Yurek made arrangements to have him transported to Keller Army Hospital.
Yes, yep. We picked out the vehicle we were going to take to. We had a bunch of rental cars, but one of them had 3 rows of seats. The car I had only had 2 rows of seats, so we talked about it like because we didn't know what he was going to do, if he was going to grab the door and try to jump out or try to fight us or what, because he was still in the room while all this was going, talks were going down. So we got the car with the 3 rows of seats. First Sergeant was driving, First Sergeant Moat. I decided to go because I was the closest with Card. And Staff Sergeant Noyes, he's a police officer, sheriff's in the sheriff's department, and he decided to come with me. So it was going to be First Sergeant driving, Noyes and I in the middle row, and then put Card all the way in the back because he doesn't have access to a door handle. And then we decided there was 2 of us. So if he did try to fight, there's 2 against 1, and that's the decision that we made. So we drove the car up to the back door, right where Card's room was. And then, yeah, we decided to take him to Keller Hospital. I'm not sure if there was any conversations with Keller Hospital. I didn't hear anything about it, but they knew we were coming. Somebody called Keller to let them know.
So getting back to the body cam video, the troopers actually entered Robert Card's room and spoke to him.
Yes.
Were you able to hear that from your vantage point?
No, I was in the car at that point.
But you've seen the video and you saw the conversation between the New York State police officers.
Yes.
And was that concerning to you when you looked at that body cam video?
Yes.
What was concerning?
He made that one comment towards the end that, and then even the police, I can't remember exactly what he said, but like it like my eyes opened when I saw that. This whole time too, like I've had my wife, like I was talking to her through text messages on the phone, and she was starting to get like more and more concerned with this whole thing, and she was terrified up until October. There was like talks about a PFA to get like a protection order too, and we decided not to do that because we didn't want to like stir the hornet's nest or anything. But
So you and your family discussed getting some kind of protective order against
Yes.
him because you were concerned about the risk of violence.
yes,
So on the body cam video, I think the conversation was, he says something like, my fellow soldiers are concerned about me because I'm capable.
that's what he said.
And the trooper asked him what he meant by that. And he said what?
he said, never mind. He like brushed it off. He wouldn't repeat it. But like it was, he just blurted that out. And I know they caught on to it, but he kind of like changed the subject after that. He didn't like say it again.
During the drive to Keller Hospital, what did you observe about Robert Card?
So like I said, it was, since the bridges were washed out, the normal 15-minute ride took over an hour since we had to go all the way to Newburgh and back down. So we were in the car with him for a while, and he was just staring out the window, and I kept turning around just to talk to him, because I've known him for so long, and he wouldn't talk to me. And then about halfway through the ride, I say 30 minutes into the ride, we're all watching him too. I remember seeing the first sergeant had the mirror turned so he could keep an eye on him, and we're all just watching him. And he starts crying, just quietly, not like sobbing, like, but his eyes watered up, and he was crying. And it started getting me, I was getting a little upset because I didn't want him to be sad. And I said, hey, what's wrong, man? Like talk to me. And I'm like, what's bothering you? And he wouldn't say a word. He just was like just stoic the whole ride up until Keller. And then we get to Keller, the state police followed us, and we go through like the emergency room entrance. There's like an awning, and then they had a bed ready for him and everything. West Point has a policy to like anything mental health. You have to have a 24-hour watch on them. And but they brought him right in and got him. It was just a bed and a chair. That was all that was in the room. And they put him back there. And then we kind of congregated in the waiting area, and we're just trying to figure out like what to do. And then yeah.
So I think on the body cam video, you make some comments about what you thought was going on with him. Did you think he was in a mental illness situation?
Yes. The night before, I actually I was talking to my wife like the whole time. I was kind of like, since like he came at me, like I didn't want to be like front and center. So I hid back in the stairwell, just listening. I can see the MPs, but I like was way back. Like if he came out, he wouldn't be able to see me. Because I just wanted to get me out of his mind. He was like so fixated on me. And but I was talking to my wife the whole time, and she said, it sounds like he has like schizophrenia or something, he's hearing voices in his head. And I believe she had a family friend or something that had schizophrenia, and like the similarities between it, like the paranoia, the hearing voices. And it seemed like we're not psychologists, so we can't like diagnose it, but we were, I didn't even think that way. My wife is the one that, brought that up. So that's what I was thinking.
And this is because she has a friend who has that illness.
Yes.
So when you started off talking, you described his acquisition of hearing aids as when you first started noticing the bizarre behavior, though.
Yes, sir.
But you didn't just say this is all because of the hearing aids. There was something else going on, or could you tell?
Up until West Point, like even in June, like we went out to lunch together during battle assembly, and he would say like weird things, like, people were talking about him, or he'd tell me a story about work, but we would get off that and just have a normal conversation. And I thought it was weird. I thought he was maybe picking up conversations, but July is when I was like, it was eye-opening when I saw how paranoid he was, and just the way he looked with his eyes, bulging out, and how gaunt he was, how much weight he lost. That's when I like realized like there's something wrong. Like he needs some more help than just a talk from his buddies. That in my opinion, that's how it was.
So was he eventually admitted to Keller?
Yes. So they admitted him to Keller. Like I said, they had that one room ready to go, at just a bed and a chair. And there was a lieutenant colonel who was on an ADOS order. It's a 1-year Army order, and he's a physician. He's a clinical psychologist or psychiatrist, or but he was there just for stuff like this. And they called him up and they said, "Oh, we got, can you come down and talk to him and evaluate him?" And he was on his way down. And that's when we were told that West Point policy is that you have to have 24-hour watch on any mental health crisis. So we decided that I would go in first. We would each do an hour. So I went in the room with them, and Wainwright and Noyes went down to Subway to go get sandwiches because it was around lunchtime, and we were going to get a sandwich for him too because we know he didn't eat. And I sat down in the room with him, and it has these big glass sliding doors, like floor to ceiling, but you can like close them totally so it seals off the room. But there's a nurse's station like right in front of those doors. There's probably like 3 or 4 nurses or emergency room workers. And I sat down in the chair, and we started having like a normal conversation. Like I forget what we were even talking about, something like the weather or something. And it was like nothing even happened. And then as we're talking, and I was like, what's the matter? What's going on, man? Like I wanted to like do a little more digging to see what was bothering him. He stops me and he says, there they go again. They're talking about me. And I go, who? And he said, the nurses at the nurses station. And I like looked over at him. The doors were closed. Like it's almost like you can't hear. It's like soundproof almost at that point. And I looked at him. I was like, Card, they don't know you. Like this is the first time they've ever seen you in their lives. You know, like you've never been here before. And it was just weird. But we talked though. The rest of that hour, we did talk. And Wainwright came in, he gave us his sandwiches. I gave Card his sandwich, and we were just eating and talking. And then my hour was up, and that was the last time I ever talked to Robert Card, was when I walked out of that room, and Wainwright replaced me for the hour. And do you need to switch?
Yeah, thank you for doing that.
Yep.
You're able to see them and you're paying attention. Appreciate that.
Yep.
So that was the last time you ever saw him.
Yes, and then Wainwright went in afterwards, and then they were setting up transportation with Four Winds, the hospital to. They said they had a bed for him, and they were setting all this up. Oh no! The colonel went in to talk with him, that psychiatrist, and he's the one that said that yes, he's having a mental crisis, and they set up the transportation after that.
Sorry, I missed who the colonel was. Was this the medical professional who was at Keller?
Yes, he was on the ADOS order. I don't know what unit he was with, but he was a licensed clinical psychiatrist. And he was a lieutenant colonel.
All right. And at that point, did all of you leave Keller Hospital and leave him in the hands of the medical staff?
Wainwright did like part of the hour because the transportation did end up getting there. But I just want to say, when Wainwright went in, Wainwright told me that Card was still talking about me, like he wanted to beat me up and or knock my teeth out, or said something along those lines when Wainwright was in there. And I thought that was so weird because, you know, we just had a normal conversation when I was in there with him for that hour. But transportation was set up, and it happened pretty quick, I'd say. Like they had a bed for him at Four Winds, and then an ambulance came and they set up transportation. And then we headed back to Camp Smith after that.
And did you and the rest of the unit then do the regular training for the West Point cadets?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. On Monday we went hot. That's when we first got cadets. But yeah, everything went fine without a hitch after that. It would, you know, we talked about it a few times during the beginning, but you know, we just got our heads in the game, and you know, the mission just ran smoothly after that. And I finished my 18th.
And eventually, did you find out that he'd been discharged from Four Winds Hospital?
Yes. So I had a 10-day order for AT, and so I did my 10 days, and I was home, and I believe it was about 2 weeks. I talked to Hodgson, like just on the phone and text messages throughout, you know, between drills and stuff. And Hodgson called me and he said, "Oh, I'm on my way to New York to go get Card." And I was like, go get Card? What are you talking about? Because that day that he got checked in, I don't know if it was like a rumor or whatever. I heard that he was supposed to be in there for 30 days. And then there was supposed to be, he had to talk to like a judge or something. And that's why when Hodgson called me 2 weeks later, I don't know if that was true or not, though. That's just what I heard. It could have been a rumor, but I was so taken back that it was just 2 weeks later. And Hodgson told me too, that like the first week he was in there, he wasn't cooperating, and he didn't want to take the medicine and this and that. and the second week, he kind of like, I forget how he put it, but like he started taking the meds and, playing the game basically to get out of there. And when Hodgson got him, he just walked right out the front door. Like there was no like discharge or anything. He said that he just pulled up and Card walked right out with his bag and that was it. And he was, and Hodgson even said that he was tired from the drive from Maine to New York, that Card even drove back. He offered to drive.
So Sergeant Hodgson was a very close friend of Robert Card
Very close.
and the closest in the unit.
I'd say so, yes.
And when you learned that he'd been discharged, were you concerned for your own safety?
Yes, my wife was concerned, like I said, from like day one. I talked to her, 100 times a day. And she was so nervous about it. And there was a picture that Hodgson sent me of Card in his uniform, in his bathroom mirror, holding a rifle. That he sent me that before he picked them up, I believe. So I got to look at my text messages, and I remember seeing that picture. I showed it to my wife too, and it like I guess I was a little too open with her because all this stuff she kept hearing about him, and she was terrified. Like she's been all the way up until October. That I remember there was a time in I think it was in September that she heard something in the woods at nighttime, and I went out. She like made me go out to check to make sure it wasn't anything, but she was that fearful that she thought Card was even in the woods behind her house. And then, like I said, the PFA, we talked to the commander about it too. And we decided not to get the PFA because it was just gonna, trigger those memories again and put me back into his mind, like center. I kind of like figured like, just let him forget about me. And, that's why I didn't even call him or text him, because I wanted him to call or text me when he was ready. But he never called or texted. And then, yeah.
So did you have drill or battle assembly in August?
Not in August. We had it in September.
And did you attend the drill in September down at the Armory in Saco?
Yes, sir.
When did you get there in relation to when the drill was scheduled?
We're supposed to get there at 07:30. I usually get there about a little after 7 because I'll stop at the gas station, grab a coffee.
That's on Saturday morning.
Saturday morning. So when I got off the highway, off of 95 there, you loop it around and there's Saco police at the red light there. And then we get down to the next red light, there's Saco police everywhere. And then I'm just like, it's different, it's not usual. You see the police like all over. And then I turn into the Armory and there's Saco police in the rec center next door. And I'm like, what is happening right now? Like, it was so weird. And then I went in and somebody pulled me aside and said that there was a threat made on the Saco Armory. And I was like, what? Like, I was so blown away by it. And the police came into the unit too. And I spoke to Captain Reamer, and Captain Reamer, they had a plan for me to get out of there if Card did show up. He said it was not likely that he was going to show up, but what they were going to do is just separate us, like get me out the back door if he did show up. And then I believe Captain Reamer spoke to the police after that too, but they had a plan for me if Card did show up.
Did you expect him to be there for battle assembly in September?
I think I heard rumors that after the West Point thing, like he was on the verge of retirement. He got his 20-year letter. I was there when he opened it. He was so happy that he got it. 20-year letter means you can submit your retirement packet in the Army. And I believe he already submitted it, or if he was in the process of submitting it. But I heard that he worked out a deal with the unit that, he was just going to retire and just, fade off. Like they weren't going to give him use for battle assembly. They just let him just retire and that was it.
So it may have never been explicit that he wouldn't be coming back for drill, but you believe that he probably wasn't coming back for drill.
Yes, sir.
And until you arrived that Saturday morning, was that the first time you heard that he might be back at drill?
Yes.
And you spoke to Captain Reamer, the company commander, and he talked about a plan to protect you in case he did show up.
Yes.
Because there was maybe a consensus that you might be the focus of his anger.
Yes, sir.
And when did you find out he absolutely was not attending?
We didn't know. He could have showed up that day at any time. And I remember talking to my wife. I called her and told her what was going on. And this like really put her into she was terrified and very fearful. Like she was losing sleep over it at this point now too. And but we didn't know if or not if he was gonna show up. He could have showed up. And I didn't know what I was gonna do. I was just gonna do what Captain Reamer told me to do and go out the back door if he did show up.
So did you at some point that weekend find out about the text message that Sergeant Hodgson had sent to his superiors?
Yes, Hodgson, he called me the morning, I believe it was Wednesday morning, because they work night shift, so they're like night owls. That's their normal, time awake is like 11 o'clock at night until like 8 in the morning. Like that's their just normal, like that's their daytime. But Hodgson told me that him and Card got into a fight at the casino and Card punched Hodgson. He called me that morning. I didn't answer the first call, but I talked to him after that. This is the Wednesday before the September Battle Assembly.
The Wednesday before
The September Battle
Battle
Assembly.
Assembly?
Yes, sir. And Hodgson just filled me in on everything, like what happened that night at Oxford Casino. And that he warned the unit, like changed the gate code. Card was saying all kinds of crazy stuff on the ride back, and Hodgson said, you can't say that stuff, dude. Like you can't say that. And that's what caused the fight, was that Card was so mad that Hodgson like wouldn't like listen to him or agree with him. He started like punching the steering wheel. He said he was driving erratic. He was doing like 70 mile an hour. I've been to Oxford Casino. Those back roads are, they're dark and windy, and he was flying down them. And then with one hand he punches Hodgson while he was driving too. Like he was just out of control. I don't know if alcohol was involved with that night or not, but it just sounded like he was really starting to spiral.
So Sergeant Hodgson was telling you all this earlier in the week,
Yes.
in a direct telephone conversation. It wasn't text message or anything.
Yeah, it was phone. He called me at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was still asleep because I'd work. I had to get up at 6:30, but I called him when I woke up.
Did you pass that information along to your superiors that morning?
No, because I believe Hodgson said he told the first sergeant, or he told the commander, or he texted him. I didn't know the exact like details in the text, I don't believe, but he said that he warned the unit that what Card was saying. So, but then again, like I didn't think it was like anything. Like when I got there Saturday morning, I saw the police. So it was like real then, you know what I mean? Like I thought it was just, a drunken argument during the time, but that when it was actual credible and the police were involved, I was like, oh boy, like this is for real. But
So October 25th, the night of the shootings, how did you first find out about the shootings?
I was in Lewiston. My daughter had basketball practice in Auburn, and then we ordered DeMillo's for takeout that night. And we left basketball and we were heading to DeMillo's, and I saw more sirens than I've ever seen in my entire life. And I'm from New Jersey. There's a lot of cops, a lot of sirens. But I said to my wife, like, is there a fire or something? And I went on the scanner on the phone. You could Google police scanners, and I turned it up, and you can hear a mass casualty event. Like they were talking clear as day. Like they weren't using codes. Like it was serious. Something serious happened. And I remember like my jaw dropped. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Like this is crazy. So we got to DeMillo's, and then we just started heading up, and my phone just starts blowing up. Like everyone's calling, like something big happened in Lewiston and this and that. And I remember when we got to Winthrop, there was police on 202. Like there was police everywhere that night. And I said to Alex, don't go home yet. Like in the back of my head, I thought Card, but like it wasn't like definite, like there was a few grainy images of surveillance cameras and the white Subaru. There was a surveillance camera of that. And I said to my wife, just go into town and go down a side street. I want to call Hodgson. So I called Hodgson and I was like, hey, are you at work right now? Cause Hodgson and Card work together. And I was like, he was driving. I said, did you see Card's vehicle in the parking lot? Have you talked to him? And after that fist fight in September, Card and Hodgson stopped talking. Like Hodgson wouldn't talk to Card. They would pass each other, you know, but there was no communication between them two. So he said like, no, I didn't talk to him. But as I was on the phone with Hodgson, my wife took 2 photos. She took the photo from that picture when he was holding that rifle in the mirror of the bathroom, and then one of the surveillance photos, and she put a collage together. And she texted it to me, and I texted it to Hodgson. And I said, hey, look at this photo. Because if anybody is going to pick out Card, Hodgson's going to pick out Card. And when I sent it to Hodgson, Hodgson said, that's him. Like he was like definite on it. Like, and I believed him. I believed Hodgson. And then it started like, I was in like, I don't know, 5 text message groups that were all going back and forth. And then he was identified so fast too. Like it was like definitely Card. And then that's when the commander called me, the Winthrop Police Department called me. Like we still haven't gone home. We're just sitting on a side street in Winthrop, and they said, don't go home, go somewhere. And I said to my wife, like, let's go. Like we're just gonna go. Just drive south. We'll get a hotel somewhere. And my phone rang off the hook that whole ride. So we drove all the way down to Kennebunkport and stayed in a Weston hotel, I believe, or some hotel. I was calling every hotel too. There was no vacancies. Like we were just driving around for hours. But that entire time, my phone is just ringing off the hook, and I'm having these conversations with my kids. I have 4 kids, and they're upset, and it was chaos. My wife was terrified, and my son has a lot of medical problems, and he has a feeding pump and medicine and diapers, and we didn't have anything. And we got to that hotel that night, and I put everybody to bed, and I couldn't sleep, and I was just taking calls the rest of the night. Sergeant Tidcombe, he's a Rundle sheriff, and he was right there. He was 5 minutes away. He called me up. He said, the command team told me to just, me and you are going to communicate where your location is. I'm not going to tell anybody. Where are you? And I said, I'm in Kennebunkport at the Westin. He's like, I'm literally right around the corner. And he came over in his police vehicle, and we talked for a little while, but I didn't sleep at all that night. And then that next morning, we checked out and we went to my in-laws' house after that. And that's when it was definite in the news, like Robert Card, you know, it was in the news, his name, and my phone was just ringing. I talked to the Maine State Police that morning. Army CID called me. They wanted to meet me in person. Like, where was I? The FBI called me. They wanted to know where, they wanted to meet me in person. And we went to my in-laws' house in Fayette after that. But it was a hectic, it was a crazy night.
So did you give an interview to a Maine State Police detective?
Yes, I believe I spoke to him on the phone, not in person. He was the only one I spoke to on the phone. I spoke to the Army CID and the FBI in person. They wanted to see me in person.
So you've been very comprehensive. I don't have any other questions, but my colleagues may very well have questions.
Go ahead, Tony.
Sergeant, thank you so much for being here today. Before I ask questions, I do want to recognize that, I mean, you folks in that unit, this is just as hard for you folks all. So I want to recognize that. So I hope you're taking care of yourself and your family as well, too.
Thank you.
Just a question about the Saco incident. So when you showed up, you saw these police cars parked around there and stuff like that. Did anyone let you know ahead of time that, hey, there's a threat at the base and also maybe to you?
Not at first, but like I said, I spoke to Captain Reamer after
You got
he
it.
stepped me aside, and he said that Card said some things that I don't think he went into specifics, but they had a plan for me to, that's when we decided to get me out the back door if he did show up, just so there wasn't, like, I was, in my mind still, I was thinking it was going to be, you know, a fit fight. But
Okay.
yeah.
So, and is it safe to say that the police was there because not only making me a threat up against the base, but also a threat against you?
Yes.
Okay. And what county do you live in?
Kennebec.
Okay. So was any messages communicated Kennebuck County about your, I mean, I don't know if Cart knows where you live and things like that.
I was worried about that because he does. We have an alpha roster, we call it. It
Okay.
has our names, numbers, and addresses
Okay.
on it. But he wouldn't, he could just look up an email and find out where my house was.
So was there any communication to Kennebuck police about you being a potential risk?
Not until the night of the shooting. That's
Okay.
the only time that I spoke to it was the Winthrop police called me and they're the ones that said, don't go home.
Okay. All right. And one last question. You mentioned that he picked up a case of beer at West Point, and so like, has he ever had a drinking problem? Or even get intoxicated?
I've drank because we've been all over. We've been to Las Vegas together, Seattle,
Mhm.
we've for the Army schools. And we'll go out. I wouldn't say like he drank to like excess, like blackout, but you know, we'd have enough beers that we had to get a taxi cab. We weren't gonna be able to drive. And he was so cautious about that because he had a CDL. And getting an OUI with a CDL is, you know, you lose
Yeah,
your
yeah,
license. So, but he was very, but I wouldn't say to excess.
So never to a belligerent point.
No,
Okay.
no.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Debbie Bader. I just want to kind of take a little bit of a left turn here, because you mentioned about getting at West Point, preparing to train the cadets, going hot. I'm not quite sure what that means. So I'm gonna ask you about that. Getting the range ready, but to start, was that training around like hand grenades? What was the weaponry
It's
involved?
M320 40 millimeter grenade launcher. So it has an effective range of 400 meters. It could shoot a 40 millimeter grenade.
And so when you go hot, those are live grenades.
Yes. So when we call it hot, it's like a saying like when you call range control, we're hot, like the red flag's up, like the range is hot. That's kind of why we use that term. But there's practice rounds that have like an orange dust in them. They're blue with a plastic top. It's just so they could get the feel for it. But then after they've fired enough practice rounds, they get the real deal, the high explosive 40 millimeter grenades. And it's just like a grenade. It's a high explosive round. It's very loud. It makes a big boom and it's dangerous. It's explosive. So we were worried about him being around that stuff.
Certainly. How many of those live high explosive grenades would be launched in a training session?
Thousands.
And how many training sessions of that type have you been involved in?
For the past 12 years now. I was on the regular hand grenade range. I was on the machine gun range, the AT-4, it's like a bazooka, and then the M320, the grenade launcher.
And was Mr. Card also involved in lots of that type of training?
Yes, when I first met Card, we were both on the regular hand grenade range. We were pit NCOs, they called us, where we're right there with the cadet with the live hand grenades to throw them to make sure that they're safe and nothing happens. But we split up. I believe it was 2016. He went to buddy team live fire, which is running with rifles and you shoot, move, communicate. And I went to the machine guns, but I think he went back to hand grenades after that, though. He was only on buddy team live fire a year or two, but he was on the hand grenade range mostly.
Yeah. And did you, when they explode, what's that sensation?
It's a concussion. But we have ears, eyes, hearing protection, eye protection, plates, full IBA, ACH, Kevlar, but it's a concussion. I started off the Army as field artillery, so we fired howitzers, and those are the loudest things I've ever been around. But a grenade is a pretty good concussion. It'll shake somebody up if they've never been around one.
And so thousands per training and training over several years.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Sergeant. Let me go back to the September battle assembly. You saw the security with the Saco PD, right?
Yes.
Did you talk directly to Sergeant Mode or Captain Reamer about why the security was there?
I don't believe I actually got like a exact like detail like that he was gonna shoot up the army, like that's what came out later. But like I said, it was more along the lines of like a fist fight is what they kind of like made. That's how the impression I got from it. And then that's when we came up with the plan for me to go out the back door if he did show up, because he did make those comments to Wainwright that he wanted to knock my teeth out. He came at me with fists at the parking lot in West Point. So I was on along the lines that he was just mad. He was like blaming us that he had to go to Four Winds. He was blaming us that, I came to find out later that he wasn't able to get the silencer that he ordered. But he was blaming us, like he had a vendetta against us. It was our fault that all that happened, but like I said, I thought it was going to be a fist fight, not a shooting.
When did you first learn about the silencer?
He told me about that before West Point. It was it must have been May or June Battle Assembly. We went to Portland Pico in Biddeford, and we were sitting at the bar, and I believe he brought it up then that he just got his tax stamp and he ordered it, and it was getting shipped to a gun dealership, but it took time. It wasn't something that happened quick, but he was excited about it, and yeah.
Did he say why he wanted it?
I always thought because he always had such bad ears. Like I figured, just the loudness from shooting because he liked to shoot. That's what I pictured it for, but no, he didn't say exactly why he wanted it.
So let's go back to September. So you had conversations with various people in the unit, but you don't recall conversations directly with Sergeant Mode or Captain Reamer. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. And when is it that you learned about the text that Sergeant Hodgson sent to Mode and Reamer?
That was when I saw the exact like text, like exactly what he wrote. That was after drill.
Okay. So did you know that he had threatened to shoot up the center?
No.
Now, you mentioned that he was not going to get a U.
Yes, they were gonna give him like an RST or something, or an excused absence. I think that's what it was.
Okay. And did you learn, or who did you learn that from?
I believe I just heard that like in the rumor mill, somebody in passing. I didn't hear it from like Captain Reamer first saw it. I think it was just, or maybe Hodgson told me. I don't know. I heard it from somebody.
Okay. Did you hear why he wasn't gonna get a U?
I think it was like the embarrassment of what happened at West Point and being checked into Four Winds. I think that was a piece of it. I think like him, blaming us was a piece of it. I think it was like an opportune time because, excuse me, that he was retiring and he could just fade off and, be out of the army and that's it. I think that's basically it.
Okay. And let me go back to the discharge from Four Winds. You were concerned about your own safety?
Yes, my wife was terrified. She brought it up. I wouldn't say daily, but it was a constant topic of discussion between us. She was genuinely fearful that, he was in behind our house with all those guns that he had, and we had that photo too, and she was concerned.
And did you talk directly to Mode or Reamer about that?
I believe I mentioned that my wife was scared. We did discuss the PFA. Oh, that's right. I talked to that September Battle Assembly when we came up with the plan for me to go out the back door. We did have a conversation about a PFA and what that process is, because Captain Reamer is law enforcement. He deals with this stuff. But he said that it might stir up more. Like he agreed, and then my wife agreed, and I agreed too, because I've never had to do anything like that. I've never been around anything like this. But we decided not to do it just because of that.
Okay. Where did you have this conversation with Captain Reamer?
In his office.
Okay. How long did the conversation last?
About 10 minutes. We were talking about other stuff too. I do the drug testing for the unit, so I think we were talking about drug testing too. But it was a concern, but like I said, I thought it was gonna be a fist fight. I didn't think like I could get away from him. I already got away from him once, you know. I didn't want to hit him like he was my friend, you know, like it was just such an awkward position to be in. It's just weird to say, but it was in Captain Reamer's office.
Okay, but between the time he was discharged from Four Winds and September 17, when, you know, the incident at Saco, did you talk to Captain Reamer or Sergeant Moat about your concerns about you and your family's safety?
When I was in the office, I brought it up that my wife was scared. And that's when we discussed the PFA, but not before that. It was at Battle Assembly when I spoke to him about
In
it.
September?
Yes, sir.
I have nothing further.
Go ahead.
So just to be clear, it was Captain Reamer who told you not to pursue the PFA because it would stir things up, or the police did?
Well, he didn't say not to. He said, you know, it's my choice. But he said that, because he has experience dealing with them. But he told me like what it is. Like I've never had to do one
Mhm.
before, but he just said like it's all it is a piece of paper, and it's possible to put you back in his mind, you know, like to you know, because he was blaming us, he was mad at us, and it would just been enough